Good evening, and welcome very, very much to Conversations, the initial program here in the year of 1989. Hard to imagine we're actually coming into the year 1989, but we have three guests who can talk about the media, politics, and some broadly conceived general notions of where we stand as a nation and as a people in the world. I'd like to introduce the guests, get into a kind of round-robin discussion of where things are. And if I may, on my far left is Kevin Saunders, and Kevin is a long-term associate with, what, ABC? You were ABC on camera, CNN, and currently working with the Weekend Future TV and other projects. And Kevin, once again, welcome very, very much to Conversations. Second to my left is Richie Havens, who again is associated with a folk singer, of course, of renown, and we're associated with Weekend Future TV. Richie, welcome again very much to Conversations. On my immediate left is Emile de Antonio, filmmaker, documentarian, and a filmmaker extraordinaire, if I may say so, having had close association with the films that you've been making. Indeed, I'd like to welcome you very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you very much.
I wonder, maybe you could start out. You've been watching the scene. You've been making film here for such a long period of time. I wonder, documentaries of great quality. I wonder if maybe you could share some of your perspective on the presentation of information within the general society, maybe looking at the problems and challenges of filmmaking, television, and their distribution. So for the general proposition, are things getting better for the American or world citizenry to get good information?
Worse.
Is it getting harder? It's getting worse.
Much worse. I mean, one of the reasons that I started making films was that because the networks were not. The networks were making material, but they weren't making films. I made a film about the war in Vietnam, for instance, because I wanted to deal with history, which is something that the networks never did. But I did not want some announcer's voice explaining it. I wanted the voices of the people who made the history, whether it was a private in the United States Army or whether it was the greatest revolutionary leader of the last 30 years, Ho Chi Minh. It made absolutely no difference. America never understood, for instance, what that war was about.
Still don't.
I don't think one American out of 10 million knew that in 1945, when Ho Chi Minh started the Republic of Vietnam, the main document he quoted was the American Declaration of Independence.
Interesting, yeah.
That did not appear in the New York Times. It did not appear over CBS. It's an unknown quantum. On that note, I return the ball to you.
No, I understand that it's a problem because these political ideologies and so forth come in, but it's actually getting harder as it is through time. You are both aware of it because you're trying to develop a thing with the Weekend Future TV, and we have tremendous technology. We have increased satellite capacity. We have complete channel capacity and so forth, greater numbers of channels, and yet at the same time, some people feel we're overwhelmed with information, but some of the crucial information isn't there. How can we think about getting politically sophisticated, relevant information, technologically, scientifically relevant information out of greater numbers of people so that there could be a greater degree of general understanding?
Well, it depends on how things sort themselves out, because there's the general chaos. Few people are more keenly aware of this than the networks, who are not merely disturbed, but close to being panic-stricken, because their great days really are over. It may be of interest, in fact, Richie and I talked with Nicholas Negroponte,
yes,
who is the head of the MIT Media Lab.
Yes.
And he will be among the guests that we'll be talking with in our coming programs called Change Makers.
Okay.
Which is the first project that WFTV will be syndicating.
Okay, we want to talk about that.
But to come back to the point that Negroponte made, he, as you know, confers and does research and studies for some of the biggest corporations in the United States on the future of the media. And CBS are among those who support his studies. And one of the studies that he made was, what is the future of the networks?
Interesting subject.
Question.
Yeah.
And so they sorted it all out and got all the information together and prepared a report for CBS. And in fact, invited one of their senior CBS executives to come up and to talk to them at the MIT lab. And the theme was, what is the future of the networks? And a very interesting response from the executive was that having looked at all the studies, and indeed from his own direct experience in the field, he said, I would have to say that the networks have no future. And his rationale was that the networks had come into being primarily to distribute programming.
That's right.
And when there were only 2 and then later 3 networks, it really was monopoly. They had the means of distribution, and therefore they controlled what was distributed. They determined what the programming was. It was, in the main, fairly timid. in concern primarily with ratings, as it still is. And that was what people got, because the networks, had control of the gateways of information. They were the gatekeepers.
That's right.
Now, McLuhan was right when he said, we change our tools, then our tools change us. The networks now have fallen victim to the fact that the technology has expanded in so many ways. There is now cable, as we are now, where anybody with cable has at least 36 channels. Some people have 50 channels. Soon, with fiber optics, we'll have 100 channels or 1,000 channels. And how people will deal with that information overload is yet to be seen. One of the things, however, that does emerge is that the network's stranglehold, the network's monopoly, if you will, is over. And is slipping away ever more rapidly. There are so many more alternatives, including video cassettes, for people to get their information from, that the networks no longer are in a position to determine what does and what does not get on air. They can in their own little province, but it's only a shrinking province.
One of the problems is the idea of common denominator program, a program that will reach the greatest number of audience. Some people have complained, even with cable and so forth, and the new channels that come along, the programming tends to ape that which had been always moving toward trying to get the widest audience, and is still, in a certain sense, a tyranny of trying to reach that widest audience, because often, to use an overworked term, certain kinds of programming, specialized programming, haven't been able to find a niche.
They haven't yet, and my guess is, short answer is, I think they will, I think they are, and I think we'll be seeing a huge array of alternative programming emerging, and some of it purely specialized in terms of services. I mean, you have a financial news network now.
Now you do, yeah.
And programs, networks that are given over entirely to sport. And indeed, programs like this, which simply could not have existed in the days of the networks.
Yeah, we really do need to have something that's going to be able to, that idea of the future of the media is interesting, the future of many other things, computers and other things, and that's something you, Richie, and you fellows have been particularly involved in, trying to establish an entity to take a base or a perspective of the future.
Yes, I think it comes from the fact that there is a great lack of accessible, usable information, because that is another factor. Information has to be usable too, and something you can do something with. And showing people the future 100 years from now doesn't do them very much good, because they won't be here, they assume. Maybe they will be, but most people will assume they won't be here 100 years from now. And so what use is that information? So there becomes a time factor involved in information that we've been sort of working with, theories of how time plays into the dissemination of information, how time plays into the quality even of information, because if something happens today and we get that today information, we call it news. If we get it next week, we call it a magazine, and so on and so forth. There are different packages that we take information and disseminate it. And there are different importances placed on that by audiences, which is not a very big studied field, a field of study in that sense, I don't think. And just on the onset. But I think what we have to really take into consideration is that the medium itself is not that old when it comes to the real mass that we're talking about, that it's affecting. It's not that old, the medium, and the amount of information coming through that small little hole, and how that used to be, like Kevin said, controlled in a certain way. That control is gone.
Well,
there's a big opening.
Yeah, it still is, even though the media in a certain, or the networks and things are in what they call the private sector and so forth. The use and the manipulation and the ability to use the media is more and more part of the political equation. Mr. Reagan was a master.
I think we went over
public
to that.
Relations, advertising technique, and so forth has become part of the political process, and manipulation or the of thought.
Yeah,
is
but
part
what
of that
you're
political
talking
process.
about, Harold, is really when you say manipulation and all of that. What you're really talking about is the science of human nature, and how people are affected by whatever it is they're getting, and who knows that. And how it's used by that person, who knows that?
Yeah.
So in a certain amount of way, you can say it has been plotted to be so. I mean, if we want to sell something to people, we find a way to do that. And if we then have access to the broadest amount of people, then something else is happening there. It's not, I used to call it, coming from the musical side, and records being the thing that you hear on radio, and so many people thinking, I turn on the radio and listen to music, to a station that's playing music for me, is a very wrong conception, because they're really just selling soap, and the music in between selling the soap is how they get you to listen to buying the soap.
Yeah, and that's
so it's a big inversion there, you know.
The market-oriented allocation of resource in general, the market allocation of information, appropriate? Is it an appropriate way, a maximally beneficial way for us to have information dissemination? Are we going to become a nation of information rich, information poor? And does the market serve, or how? How do we do it? Public television? What are some of the other?
I think every time a revolutionary idea has come in a medium, no matter what it is, say the printing press, that the idea is revolutionary, but it never reaches wide numbers of people until that idea is rationalized and made commercial. By the time that great numbers of people could afford books and started reading books, already the book market was broken up into serious books, cheap novels, flashy novels. Television, of course, which is really a whore, was born a whore and will die a whore in its present form. That because of movies and because of progress, so-called progress, many quotation marks. From the very beginning, television was involved with the cheapest, flashiest kind of stuff. And when we look at today, what we look at today, is there anything in all those 50 channels? How many times do you really see anything and see something that is visual and hear something that really belongs to an auditory experience that is a profound or a real experience? The news is not real. The news is an item to be sold. Any viewer can just pace the news with a stopwatch, and it stops at certain points for commercials.
Is it a lack of aesthetic on the part of the people in the industry, perhaps? I mean, it takes...
No. It's the profit system motivates it in this country and in Europe, in the West. In the so-called socialist countries, which are not very socialist, there it's essentially dominated by ideas of propaganda. The places that are curious and interesting are cities like East Berlin, where the government wants them not to have Western television. But since they're on the border of West Berlin, their TV is probably the most interesting TV in the world, because they get West television and East television.
Yeah.
And that's
interesting.
That's a curious place to be in. Here it's monolithic. In spite of, I get almost 50 stations. There, at 9 o'clock at night, there's very little except old films. An old film, but there's no effort that's human that is some art form that somebody really wants to do it.
Yeah, but maybe you're talking, if I may, maybe you're talking about the aesthetic. I mean, there aren't that many painters that are at a really high level. It's how you draw your line of aesthetic of what makes good program. If you're talking at that level, as opposed to, let's say, the news. You know, it's an artful thing.
American people, the country where we live, that you could get all of these experiences. You could get high art, you could get good information, and you could have all the poppy time, heroin type programs that put people to sleep and get their minds off of work and boredom and being unemployed as well. I mean, it's certainly a tool that keeps people's minds off of where their minds should be in most cases.
You've worked in film most of your life. Do you see a sister relationship between...
I've worked in film, I'm in my 60s. I've worked in film since 1961. I used to be a college teacher. I've done all sorts of things. I mean, do you see, like in cinematography and those kind of skills, a link between film and video, and is video an extension of film? And how do those two things fit together? Video has helped to destroy film, because more and more films are now making deals. You can't make a film today that's going to be seen unless you already have a video deal, a TV deal, a distribution deal. That awful man, Donald Trump, with his wretched book, The Art of the Deal, hit it on the head. That is what it's about. It's not about art, it's not about information, it's not about love, it's not about giving, it's not about being human, it's about making money. Is it about the structure of our society forces this upon us all then, and what brings this about? It's a lack, if I may. Being that I entertain in media in the sense of singing to people live, sitting in front of me, quite often during the year, for the last 30 years.
there is something that I get to observe, and it's a certain commonness. It's a certain equality of vessel. I don't know what else to call it. Equality of vessel, you know, that I get to see, that sits in front of me and is receiving information in the form of song, as I would sing it. Singing the kind of songs I sing, which to me come from the ability or the lack of this kind of song that sings about the unity, the single vessel that we all share, which is disseminated by politics or religion or all these things like culture, due to a geographical placement on the planet, and coming to a time, you see, because again, I try to stress that we're very young, whatever society we think we are, we're very young, because I don't know too many who have people over 200 years old at this point. So we're from about 100 years down, here we are.
And certainly the technological infrastructure is young. I mean, it's
yes, as well. But what I'm getting at really is that we are more or less being put upon by media in terms of forcing separation of ideas and society than unity of society or ideas.
So how do we move more beneficially?
We're trying to do that.
Where do we go? I mean,
we're trying
really
to do that.
program films like you've done over the years and so forth. You're putting out things, but you know.
I'll just
you're trying to
throw this in.
Yeah.
What WFTV is an attempt to commandeer a certain amount of time of the day. We call it 8 hours a day, which is an average mindset day in the average person's mind. That 8 hours means something. And in that time frame, address as many common concerns, as many universal concerns, universal credits that we do have, that consciously, that we do understand.
The
together.
future, you're taking the perspective of the future.
And that's right. And the future within a year and a half, accessible future, something we can do something within as a one body. When we can understand where that one body comes from. It comes from lack of information. The body that suffers is a body that suffers from lack of information. The body that gains is a body that gains from an abundance of information, and that body has to have agreeance in all of its parts, you know, and that can only happen by a brand new focus, a brand new media perspective.
It might be able to bring some pattern recognition to some of this overflow of information that's coming.
Absolutely right. If you take 8 hours a day and you put 11 programs on, like we're attempting to do, which tries to cover our most everyday commonalities that we do go through, whether we talk about them with each other or not, whether we agree that we do or not, the very basic human things, addressing those things, and bringing out information that can, in fact, help to motivate, uplift, inspire, build upon these natural things.
And still, hopefully, be able to find a niche within the commercial and so forth realities of the time.
That's right.
Maybe
because,
it's making such possible.
That's right. It is possible to do because there are companies now who are becoming conscious of the fact that even though they've been around for a long time, their lack of knowledge of what they've been doing to the planet is now coming to bear. And they have to now learn what they've been doing for many years. There's a lot of hindsight that has to be looked at in actual seriousness, as real hindsight more than foresight. At this point, we can say that we don't really have to learn how to do good things. We have to learn how to stop doing bad things. In a sense. In a sense.
Someone said that the revolution ended when Abby Hoffman paused quietly and unthinkingly on the Johnny Carson show for the commercial. And that there's some truth in that. I mean, the commercial motive, the commercial superstructure still controls most of those 50 channels, not all. I think it's a wholly good thing that there are ever more tents in the media sideshow. It gives us a chance to get more things through, although it doesn't guarantee that that it will come through easily or often. There's the cynical view that sort of 95% of everything is crap. and therefore it doesn't automatically mean that there will be a blossoming of thought and beauty on television. But there at least is an opportunity now that did not exist before. Someone wrote a book, I forget the title of which was Death of Politics, which argued, as I recall, that the evolution of media from the development of Gutenberg's press on tended to undermine the political power, that in fact it may be that the governance of a civilization, of a world, is no longer in the hands of governments, elected governments, or dictatorships, or secret services, or secret societies, but is in the hands of the media. And the greater diversity that exists within the media, and the greater number of outlets, the greater opportunity that something good will get through. And I think that therein lies the hope.
Are you bothered the fact that even though there's greater numbers of vehicles, they're all being owned by fewer and fewer people? There's buyouts and concentration of ownership, and ultimately then ownership control, which filters through it, is a problem in terms, particularly if you have some programming perhaps that isn't politically favorable to people who are in positions of power.
I do not think, for example, that you will see on NBC any deeply explorative programming on nuclear power in view of the fact that General Electric owns NBC. There are all sorts of connections, some of which are known, some of which are less well known. For example, it's not widely known that the late CIA director William Casey was a member of the board of directors of Cap Cities, which owns ABC. Right. And there are links of this kind all over the place that does limit, narrow, restrict the amount of and the kind of information that will come through on the networks. This is less so, I think, with Turner Broadcasting, which tends to be more independent, not totally independent. I mean, again, the bottom line for any commercial operation is that it must be able to bring in sufficient advertising revenue to pay the bills, to put the soap in the bathroom, and keep the satellites in the sky.
Unless they have some pay system, some sort of
unless you move
billing
into a pay system,
which
if you are, it could be argued is elitist because you have to have the money to be able to buy the pay system. But true, pay TV is yet another avenue which opens up possibilities and freedom of expression which had not existed before. And I think, at the end of the day, whenever that may be, maybe I mean the end of the century, I think that there will certainly be more, quote, freedom coming through your television set, which you now look at, than at any time before. By the way, an interesting example of the, quote, bad old days of the network monopoly, and I don't know if I've mentioned it to Emile de Antonio before, but I first became deeply impressed with his work in Australia. Must be nearly 20 years ago when I saw on TV there a program on the Kennedy assassination, which as far as I know has still never been broadcast in the United
Rush
States.
to Judgment, that was Mark Lane, yeah.
It was broadcast here on CUNY.
Oh, was it? All right.
Which is like
an example of what, yes.
Yeah, and a couple of other small stations. Basically, I think that your view is I'm sympathetic to it, but I think it's too optimistic because unless there's some way that the idea of quality, and I don't mean class quality, I don't mean stuff that eliminates most viewers, but some idea of quality is brought in. And sometimes it happens under the worst kind of governments, like Margaret Thatcher's. Channel 4 in England became an absolutely unique television station. It did films that along all kinds of and they weren't TV programs. They were basically films, because films finally make some of the best TV programs. And it was a very lively station, and it was due to one man, unfortunately. He's gone. He's now running Covent Garden. But he created a TV station, and it became a very popular TV station. I dare you to name one show on ABC, CBS, or ABC that's worth looking at in any hour of the long day that we live under.
Well, how about something like Nightline? that they do, a nightly service they do where they illuminate events and so forth.
I don't think it illuminates that much. I think there's too much focus on a star reporter, frankly. And he's getting his thing off, but it's not really, there's more flash and sound rather than illumination. I mean, it takes too long to do it, too. To be honest with you, if you had a decent newspaper, which we don't have either, had we you could read the stuff in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I think that there's such a total media control here, which is one of the reasons that we always argue about the rest of the world. There is no freedom, because we don't have freedom either. I don't see it in the rest of the world, I confess. And
you don't see freedom in the rest of the world
no,
media either, right?
But I live here.
Now, again, is this politically motivated? Is this
I think it's the same
thought control?
thing.
Is it commercially
motivated? I think the commercial motivation, which finally represents the people here who have the money, constitutes a kind of censorship and political coverage that denies TV to any of us on a large scale. We're here. This is wonderful what we're doing here.
Would deny TV in terms of the message, which might be subversive of the interests of the people who are in control of the society and so forth?
Well, it would be interesting, wouldn't it,
that way?
if they had common sense. You might even have beautiful television as well as highly informative television, and but you're not going to have it the way we're going now. If you start something new, it's possible, but who will pay for it? At what point do you have to compromise? At what point?
That's a very good question, and you know, and I think that at this particular
the better
point,
you are, the harder it'll be.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. I'm really, we're becoming very aware that the windows for really purely getting something like this through are in fact opening up. I mean, in a sense, we've been offered without from cable systems. Certain amount of time windows to put the programming through without any basis to input into the program. So there are windows and there are places opening up, and especially in the cable market, in that sense, which basically I think also comes from a sense of consciousness which is now coming into the media. You see, again, we have stratification of consciousness. There are some very old intents behind the old television, and there are some very new people coming into the media where by hook or crook or by proxy or anything stumble upon something that it becomes popular. And a beginning begins, in a sense. Down the line it may be stolen, it may be, bastardized, it may be whatever, but something breaks through. It's like that seed that has to be planted every so often for it to grow. It's going to take that time. But I do find at this point there are places where we can find camaraderie in consciousness, which is a very different approach to television. See, we've started approaching television as, in fact, not approaching a marketplace, but approaching the consciousness we now know exists out there in a stratification around the planet that is incongruent with each other. It's called global mindedness. To a certain degree, we have to almost agree, or we maybe should in some due time agree, that global mindedness is a stratification of mind in an age group that started at a particular point on this planet. And it has started, and it does exist. That group of people as audience or marketplace or consciousness is equal or maybe almost better than the old audience of mindset, birth of television, entertainment-oriented, profit motive-oriented television consciousness.
And you think it has a youth quality to it, do you? You think there's a young consciousness emerging in the evolution of consciousness itself?
From radio station to radio station, for instance, and from TV station to TV station. The first thing I hear when I walk in the door is, boy, I saw you sing in my college at, and most of these people are station managers.
Yeah.
Some of them are the camera people. Some of them are, and this is where my, even hope, I kind of call it a actualization field.
But there's a sort of evolution of consciousness that might be even beyond what the everyday normal material realities and political realities that we see.
Exactly.
And something should be able, artistic sensitivity could perhaps be tuned to that, and there should be programming that would be able to
appeal directly.
Resonate to that consciousness.
That's what I'm saying.
Scale.
I think that documentary of time, well, it's not even that. I think that there's an actuality in time, in media. It's called documentary. It's a kind of an actualization of that time. We try to capsulize that actualization so at least in history it is there as clear as we could have a good picture of it. For the mass to have some sense of that time in an actual form, a real-time form. The more real-time something is captured, the more actual we're going to believe that this is history for real. It's hard for us to go back and shoot George Washington now. We can't do that. But the fact is, you know, we've been able to more or less document so much of our own time that there's no way to run away from it. There's no way to run away from the mistakes we've made. There's no way to run away from all of these blatant things that are coming about. So there's wherein lies the hope that I'm seeing, that is now, in a sense, the idea is to move off of marketplace, move off of audience, move off of that to consciousness, because now I feel we're critical mass.
And then how do we translate that into the realities, the technological and necessary business realities of an up and going and running television service that actually gets into people's homes? And so
I think we're almost doing it in a sense. It's now stratified in a different way, a vertical sense. It's like looking at, turn on the TV and you say, okay, there's a Discovery Channel. It's a whole channel. It calls itself Discovery. Okay, now people today's minds are more apt to take this vertical line and feel comfortable with that day if they were to turn it on. In other words, if their mind's so stratified, they turn it on and say, well, I feel comfortable with this channel being on all day. There ain't a lot of channels you would do that. You know, those kinds of things are beginning to happen to people. The sports channel, the Discovery Channel, the medical channel, these things are kind of, to me, indications of where this first foundation of accessible information and accessible change.
There might be a signal of the fact that there is a technological capability where programming that UD would have thought was of a high quality and that sort of thing might be able to find a viable niche in order to be able to have an ongoing kind of capability to influence. You have a generally optimistic sense of the possibility that these new things. And how about you, Kevin?
Optimism is the only practical attitude. I think the economics are a very serious problem in a sense. If you have something like a TV show that costs a lot of money to make, and you know, it costs you at least $100,000 to make our quote competitive program. And therefore, when things become that expensive, as you were saying, you know, it's a matter of the deal. Somebody said the most important credit on any film should be deal by, because that determines how it got to be there and how it got to be made and why it was what it is. I think that this, in a sense, again, the mechanics, the instruments of creativity here are becoming better and lighter and cheaper.
That's true.
All at the same time.
That's true.
And that is going to make possible an independence that was not possible before. This program itself, you know, in its own way, is an example of that. So, yeah, I'm on balance. I would say I'm optimistic. What really I would like to feel or to believe or to see in place is to see someone on duty. By that I mean something like this. The editor of the Times of London many years ago was asked, why do you run such a boring newspaper? And he said, to be there if needed. And I don't have a feeling, even now, with all of the good things I've said about television, as I spin across the 50 channels on the dial, I don't really have a feeling that there's anyone there looking after the shop, that there's anyone there if needed. And at the risk of being monumentally arrogant, which I sometimes am, I would say that I would like to think that the sort of thing that Richie and I are working on with WFTV and our program Changemakers, will represent something like that. That doesn't mean that our programs are going to be relentlessly serious or grim.
Educational.
You know, the deadly word, educational, informational, yes. Informational and to be entertaining, this is essential, and to be very often light. Angels fly because they are light. But at the same time, to be there if needed, to really have a sense of the big picture and a sense of direction, so that when it really is needed that certain things be illuminated and said or discussed, or that the right questions, above all, the right questions be asked.
Yeah,
Ask the right questions, the universe will reveal all its secrets.
Yeah, Buckminster Fuller used to talk about how we might be able to tap the poetic consciousness and the consciousness of some of our, let's say, leaders in the fullest sense of the word, who are very likely not likely to be the political leaders, but the ones who comprehensively can understand and in a systems way give us understanding to what it is that's transpiring in terms of the evolution of consciousness or events in this part of the universe. I mean, have some way of having that kind of leadership, which may be political, but often sets itself in a sort of systems way outside. It's very such leadership would be likely to underpin a system of rule by international law, for instance, whereas political leaders might, and the leadership of a country might very well try to run away from that concept. Our government has more recently and so forth. Ruling governments are very likely to be upset by people who, in a sense, are meta to the understanding and control systems that they represent. Do you understand? I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does make sense.
Who are our real leaders philosophically in terms of fulfilling human purpose in the universe at this time? And how can we let their perceptions become available to people by which they can get a sense of identity and purpose in the universe and so forth?
Well, some lie quiet and are subversive and unknown, and their works finally come out. I mean, Bucky Fuller was a polymath. You know, he knew everything.
He was a comprehensivist.
Polymath is the precise word for it, and yet he was relatively unknown to the mass population of your time or of my time and of this time. Totally unknown to the mass population.
Unfortunately.
A small beam that I see out there, and it's a very tiny beam because it's addressed primarily to people who have a little bit of money, is the cassette revolution, where you do have the opportunity to go out and buy first-class works from the past, as long as crooks didn't make the tapes. I mean, I've bought tapes in error, for instance, of Bertolt Brecht's plays that were, the film was shot in 35, and then somebody messed it up so that the frame is all wrong, everything's cut out. I mean, you only do that once. You do it once, and then you figure you'll never buy another tape unless you look at it. But tapes do give you a kind of historical opportunity in the home to understand what film is, how it became television. It gives you an extraordinary insight to use your head and your own critical abilities, which I think is rare and interesting. The problem is, of course, as I say, tapes are priced out of the market for the average person, or for the particularly. Anybody can have his brains blown out by television by just buying the bloody set. But to buy tapes, you need something else.
You need a machine, a cassette recording machine.
Well, you need a VCR, and then you have to buy the tapes, which average $40 a piece.
Well, yeah, it is a way of, like in Xerox, you said before.
And you can rent them.
It's a little bit of a way of
but it is a tremendous step forward.
Yeah, it's a real liberation.
It's getting past the gatekeepers a little bit in Xerox, like the Xerox that you said before.
Andrew Young, we mentioned this before the show, on the question of secrecy and the media and so on, and Andrew Young was asked what was the most important lesson he had learned in his time at the United Nations, and he said that in the age of the Xerox there are no secrets.
Yes,
and the
VCR.
Yeah. In fact, Stuart Brand has said that one of the most interesting things he said, first of all, nobody has worked out the economics of information. It's such a new thing. I give you. I sell you a car or give you a rose, you have it, I don't. But I give you information, I still have it, you can give it to someone else, you don't lose it. Information, to use Brand's phrase, he said, information wants to spill. It wants to spread. And you actually have to spend money to stop it from spilling. You have to put things on the tape so you can't copy them, or scramble the signal so they can't be rebroadcast, and so on. So there is if one could catch the natural tendency to ubiquity of information, again, quoting Brandt, he said, whoever discovers first the economics of information will probably win a Nobel Prize and make $1 billion. So tapes are an interesting example of this. They
become
are
unemployable at once.
Yes,
well, that might be an interrelated thing. You were talking before, the information overload. Buckley Fuller used to talk about how maybe at a meta level to our normal perception, we may, with technological augmentation, be on a systems way, worldwide, making progress in the sense that technology is providing life support to where the underlying reality of scarcity, which had been the condition in which all human institutions had evolved, might actually be superseded by a reality of sufficiency or even an opening on surplus.
That's right,
and that would change the geopolitical possibilities of what is thought possible. It might be a mark of a liberating condition that could be understood by consciousness.
In a sense, that's what I was saying.
Certainly our warring and our scarcity and our war-making based on these scarcity assumptions is one of the major threatening elements that is there now. Information might be able to lend itself to a condition of sufficiency.
That's what I was saying before, is that you have this spot consciousness. You know, it's like spot consciousness was, before, I think we were talking about it before the show as well. It's nations are spots on the globe. And it's very difficult in a political way, in a even religious way, in a religious way, it's probably more than a political way, to have a stratification that goes around the globe that can call itself global.
Global village.
On any one of those, using any one of those old axioms of politics or whatever. Consciousness supersedes that. Consciousness now, you can find the same top 20 records in the middle of Africa in a disco that you're going to find in England, that you're going to find in Germany, that you're going to find in America, that you're going to find in South America. It's the same top 20 songs.
Some of those songs are coming out of Africa now, happening.
Well, I mean, that's where the exchange begins, is
Yeah.
when we find a common ground, is what I was trying to say before. Consciousness, it finds its own level, like water, in a sense. It finds its own level, and it spreads on that level to either become a global fabric, or understanding, or acceptance, or agreeance, or whichever word we want to use to describe this commonality that we create, because this commonality is constantly being created. See, commonality may in fact not be something universal and old, as much as it may be to be created, in a sense of our agreeance. These new things.
Yeah, we may be on a race with, for the first time after 200,000 years of evolution, we can apparently, I'm not sure, but apparently we can collectively destroy our species, which we couldn't do even within our lifetimes. So we may be on a race with finding some qualitative transformation in the human condition that could be roughly thought of as liberating, as the obverse side of the destructive capability. Do you think it's an exciting
I think that our
time
genius
now?
at this point is absolutely rushing towards death.
Yes, you feel
in an extraordinary way. And I don't mean the obvious things like hydrogen bombs, but I mean also the shaving cans, the cans of shaving cream, the ozone layers, the death of field crops, the poisoning of the water. Simultaneously, this is going on in every place in the world, whether it be the socialist countries, the so-called underdeveloped countries, the advanced capitalist countries. All governments seem to be totally indifferent to the idea of large numbers of people dying. They almost think as if people did in the Middle Ages, when they assumed that the upper classes would survive plagues and everything else because they were in their castles and not mixing with everybody else. But we're all mixed now, no matter where you hide, the death that we have spread is going to reach us. And there's such a vast indifference to this. I thought, well, in the United States, we have an old man as the president who is not a very intelligent man, who's not very concerned with the human condition, and it'll change. But it's not going to change. And it's not going to change until 500 people who count, in a way, get radicalized about it and start making... the media have ignored it. The media slough it off. They do an editorial or they run a big story, and then it's forgotten because the media is like accretions of trash that pile up one on the other.
They have to be sycophant to the power that runs things.
It's
all
more
owned by 5%.
complicated than that. They are the powers.
They are the power to agree,
thing.
and if they aren't at the very top of the power, they have to be sycophant.
And
to it,
a paper like the Times will say,
values.
don't you remember on Wednesday, June the 18th, 1987, we covered that point?
Yeah, right.
And they did, but then it's forgotten, because that's, with the information overload, with TV pouring its stuff out and newspapers and everything else, somebody's going to have to stop and say, look, the South Pole, our water, the fact that ducks and that mammals are dying, that people are dying, and the fact that the water of this city, when I moved here, when I got out of the Air Force in 1945 and went to college, went to graduate school, the water here was great, coming out of a tap. It's undrinkable now, and nobody says anything about it. Nobody cares about it.
Yeah, these things all have to do with the way in which we organize society. You have not that much faith in the political leadership as it's being manifest?
None.
Do you have faith in the concept of leadership? Are there people with overarching or comprehensive vision or ideas that are turning on a system to gain their ideas?
I see a government that talks about building more prisons.
No, but I say, are there sources of information that are worthwhile are trying to disseminate?
Yes,
are there people
absolutely.
of vision?
Absolutely.
So we should have a channel or some system where these people
they're not in
who are
politics or the
they're
network
not. They
TV.
tend to be people that are poetic, perhaps conscious, they're artistic,
Doers.
or
One of the
people
most
who have.
brilliant men in America is John Cage.
Yes,
Now almost
yes,
80 years old.
yes, right,
He was a friend of Bucky Fuller's,
Yes.
etc.
Yes.
He's a spiritual man. He's a macrobiotic diet. He used to be an alcoholic with me, but that's something else. And but you know, who knows who he is?
Well, a number of people, but not as many as
But
us.
sitting here, Wes, we know who he is, but who knows who he is in the general world, for instance? People like him, and I'm afraid almost like ourselves, get lost in that general world.
Let me ask you a perspective. You've been viewing these things and feeling much of it. Are you more or less optimistic about the prospects for our nation, let's say within a world context, than you were 20 years ago, 10 years ago? What is it trending?
That's a highly personal question. I have a lot of energy, so I'm essentially optimistic, or I'd put a bullet through my head.
Yeah, right. All right. Yeah, right. All right, fine.
In part, I mean, history is going to judge us by our taste in information. And it is true that the right questions are not being asked. Not one of the three networks, in fact, I don't know any television station that has an environment editor, let alone an ecology editor. I mean, they really haven't come to grips with this central issue of our time as yet. They will, but hopefully not too late. One of the things that WFTV and with our Changemakers program that we will be aware of will be to find the people who are doing things that are bringing about change that can take us away from the brink, that can help solve these crushing problems that loom upon us. And to a large extent, this is why I think that the media is running the show, whether it knows it or not. And it unfortunately doesn't know it, which is why we're sort of lurching blindly from the blind leading the blind. And one of the problems I think has been so until now, even now, is that again we're not asking the right questions, and by that I mean we have not geared ourselves to looking for solutions. Nothing is more depressing, and nothing will turn off an audience more than a program that is designed merely as a big fret about the problem. Too many programs, too many conferences, too many newspaper editorials, and too many television programs which, when they finally address these issues, simply become or fall into the idiom of what I call, isn't it awful? Isn't it awful reporting? And it's just sort of one big, long thumbsuck and gee, isn't it terrible? And not addressing themselves, they do not address themselves to the obvious question, which will be, all right, what do we do? I mean, not just rhetorically, but precisely. You know, like what can you do about the nuclear proliferation problem? Like what can we do tonight, right now? Answer, very simple. You could stop nuclear testing. That would be a very effective way. What could you do by the weekend? What could you do within a year? What could you do within 10 years? Same sort of questions exactly should be asked, could be asked, must be asked about the ozone layer or the rainforest or all of these other problems.
You know, one of the big problems with that, Kevin, is that there's a time factor. I keep coming back to this time. See, time is a very elusive, strange thing in itself. It's because there's a time factor involved in what could be done. When you say that, it's to whom you say that, and from when the answer comes from, is how long what can be done. We'll have a time factor put on it. It's like saying, okay, there's one way to stop bomb making. There's only one way. That's everybody who works on bomb making in any company who does it just stops working. It's as simple as that. Those who will then be put to the test of taking that job when it's been let go by consciousness then has to live with himself in doing so. We're now taking another type of stance in human value, human potential, human experiment of human value and potential. Because again, when we look back, we talk about human value and the ways that the commonality of humanity is that we all have to work, we all have to eat, we all have children, we all love our families, we all sleep, and we all would like to have at least one dream that we can make come true. That's it. Mm-hmm. It's a very basic thing. And when we start to make it complex, time, for instance, I think here's that thing with time with me. I have this big thing with time. Time, if you go back in time, gets less complex. Time itself gets less complex.
It's
time. Yeah. When you want to go back in time, there was a amity job rather than a civil servant job or servant slave situation in a communal societal way. You see, because when you say amity, everybody in the village had a job. Everybody in this tribe had a job. The kids had their place until they were a certain age. Then they had a job, and the women have a job, and it's all for the sake of this community. Mm-hmm. So it was civilization itself that changed that.
And this is
all peoples on the planet. All peoples on the planet.
Speaking in time, James Joyce used to have Daedalus say, history is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken, which might be a way of seeing it collectively back to Buckminster Fuller as a comprehensive looking at consciousness or the evolution of human events within a broader conceived evolution of universal consciousness and so forth. We really are. It's probably an old-fashioned expression to say these are exciting times or something, but in a new and different kind of way, given the technological extension that we have. The information is part of that technological extension. It's a time of gestation that we've been going through, or a time of some new kind of breakthrough that the conditions almost require of the time, if we're not going to go down in the history-laden, institutional-bound systems that are going to take us over the brink that you so fear. It's a time almost of gestation, of birth to some new, liberated way, as an obverse to the holding on to the old ways. Do you understand? There's something new is really required.
It's good you mentioned Joyce, because look what he did. He took language. He gave the history of language in Ulysses.
Yeah.
He covered one day in 800 pages, and it's probably the greatest novel of the 20th century. Mm. And when it was banned, it was read widely. And when it became accessible, it was read widely in the beginning. And now it's read apparently widely, but thinly. Mm-hmm. People go through it, but they don't read it. It's too much of a commitment. We are already, there's a kind of profound biological and psychological effect just of the media, the way they are. Media overkill, the millions of images that we're confronted by every day. Whereas to read a serious book that's a great work of art, like Ulysses, takes commitment.
Yeah, well, that's true. Listen, we're running right out of time. Kevin, you were going to say something.
Well, I just wanted to put in context my rant about all of the questions that we are going to ask about how the world can be saved in our program Changemakers. If any of our would-be sponsors out there are listening, I want to stress that the program is not about crises and the version of crises. It is essentially an entertainment-oriented program. And these things will, however, occasionally be discussed when and as they arise, and when and as we can find the people we want to talk with. We are conscious of the need to do that. That doesn't mean that that is what the program is about entirely. However, we are not what an NBC executive described the early evening news on NBC as being, and got into a lot of trouble for being quoted. He said, our program, he said, is for ignorant housewives who want to remain that way.
No, it's not.
That's not what we're doing.
Well, okay, it's moving in the right direction. I think probably one thing we all agree, Dee, who's been working in documentaries, and all of us agree, is that the media offers a great opportunity and challenge for there to be relevant, aesthetically perceptive, better kinds of information that can be made available to greater numbers of people. We try and do that to the degree we can. We wanted to show some footage and so forth of some of Dee's work and other things. We'll have to do it on another occasion, which I would like to do. But I'm sorry we're running, as always. It's relentless. We're running out of time, as it happens. And so I'm afraid we're going to have to just say goodnight for now. It's good to have been able to bring this as the initial program in our 1989 series.
Yeah.
We'll have to come back and do some more of this kind of thing toward the end of the year next year. But I would remind you, it's been your pleasure. On my immediate left, Emile de Antonio, or D, filmmaker and documentarian extraordinary, with whom I would like to this time say we'd like to do soon with you a serious program where we would bring in some of your clips and so forth that we wanted to do. But I thank you for coming in and participating here in this general discussion of media and so forth. Second to the left, Richie Havens, who's involved, the singer, of course, involved with the World Future TV, and of course Weekend Future TV. I'm sorry, Weekend, look, worldwide and Weekend Future TV. Global context is something that we need, and of course Kevin Saunders, who is working on with Richie in that and many other projects. There are other things we want to talk about, some political things we didn't, all of which tells us that we have much more programming that we can look forward to bringing as we begin to move further into 1989. Thank you all very much for coming in. We thank you for viewing, and would like to invite you here in Conversations. Tune in again next week. That's it for this particular segment. We'll be coming back again next week in Conversations. Gentlemen, once again, thank you very much indeed. It's terrible to feel as though we only just scratched the surface of so many of these subjects, but it's important matters. So, again, thank you very much for viewing. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Thank you.